In this lecture, we're going to talk about a few tips, techniques, a couple of strategies that you can use that maybe didn't really fit in to any of the other lectures very neatly. And there are also particular strategies that a lot of students maybe aren't aware of, maybe they aren't taught in many places, and so we're calling this lecture Secrets to Success. So we're going to specifically look at 4 little tips and techniques for just getting your score that little bit higher in the general training module, task 1. First of those is about counting words. Counting words takes a lot of time. I mean, if you look at that picture on the screen there, we take a lot of time to read all of that. This is all the definition of words, how the word can be used. But of course, we do need to make sure that we write at least 150 words, because if we don't, we will lose marks for not meeting all task requirements. Minimum 150 words. However, it takes a lot of time, as I mentioned, and you can avoid this time wasting by not counting all the individual words. Instead, what you can do is count how many full lines are in your letter, and you take this figure and you multiply this figure by the number of words in your first full line. That way you can have a pretty good estimate of the number of words that you have altogether without having to count each individual word. If your final figure is comfortably over 150, you're almost certainly okay, because you probably missed out words that were not in full lines, and you probably missed out a few words here and there anyway. And that way you can feel comfortable about moving on to task 2 or spending more time checking your letter. Also, in general, just practice. You'll start to get a feel for what 150 words looks like on the page, and you'll start to get a feel for what it feels like to write 150 words or more. The second secret is about conditionals. We've looked at conditionals already. As you can see on the screen here, there are that if, then, cause, effect, condition, result. We can swap them around in either direction. And the nice thing about conditionals is that they're a great way to boost the grammatical complexity of your letter, and that means it's excellent that they're so easy to include at the end of your letter. If you didn't find an opportunity to include them in the body of the letter, and I recommend that you do try anyway, then you can at least add them at the end in many cases. Not all cases, but many. So let's have a look at some examples. Here's an informal example. If you could get back to me as soon as possible, that'd be great. Notice that. If, then that'd be great. We can remove the then, just say that'd be great. And notice that contraction there, that would becoming that'd. And it would be highly appreciated if a response could be sent as soon as possible. Hopefully you can already recognize that as a much more formal tone. It would be appropriate in a formal letter. We're also using the passive voice. We'll be talking about that a bit later in this lecture. But notice both of these expressions could come before a best or a cheers or whatever it might be in the informal letter, or before a yours sincerely or a yours faithfully in the formal letter. Now, a special use of the is what we're going to talk about in this third secret, a special use of the definite article. We have mentioned this in passing, but I want to focus on this here, particularly as you might have forgotten it or maybe didn't absorb it so much the first time around. A great way to demonstrate a high level of comfort and confidence with informal letters is to use definite articles where you might not otherwise, where they wouldn't be appropriate in a formal letter or in task 2 essays, etc. Using definite articles in a particular way, which we're going to look at, suggests a much closer, more intimate relationship than using possessive pronouns. Let's have a look at some examples. How are your kids? Can become how are the kids. That sounds a bit strange maybe, but it's how we might speak to somebody that we felt very familiar with, very comfortable with. I've been having trouble with my boss again. Can become I've been having trouble with the boss again. So we use this definite article because it helps to further imply that the two of you are in something together, that you both know exactly what's being spoken about. My does it too, but we both know who your boss is, so we start to use the definite article as it's so intimately understood who this person is. We need to go shopping at the weekend since my in-laws are visiting for the weekend. Can become, we need to go shopping at the weekend since the in-laws are visiting for the weekend. Same thing, both very well understood who these people are. How's Katie getting on at her new school becomes how's Katie getting on at the new school. This one's perhaps a little bit easier to understand. You might instinctively add a definite article anyway, but it's being used for the same reason. We want to communicate this intimate relationship that we have with another person who's very close to us. Now, there are some exceptions, one of which is that you should avoid using definite articles to refer to singular family members or friends, because this can seem cold, a bit dismissive, and even maybe rude. For example, writing "how's the daughter," it sounds disrespectful. If I were to ask someone this, they'd probably look at me a little bit funny. How's the brother, how's the mum, etc. It doesn't sound quite right. But writing "how's the family" or "how are the kids," because that's more of a plural aspect, and family, although it's a singular, you're looking at plural members, that's okay. As usual with a lot of this stuff, if you're not confident using this particular use of the definite article, then don't worry, you can just use possessive pronouns instead. Finally, let's think about the last secret, which is using the passive voice in formal letters. So it's very common to use the passive voice more often than usual when writing formal letters. Exceptions do apply, but in general, it's considered a bit less formal to use personal pronouns instead of using the passive. For example, I placed the documents in a transparent blue folder with an elastic binding. This isn't too problematic, it's not a big deal. I don't think you would be pulled up too much on this by the examiners, but it would sound better to write, the documents were placed in a transparent blue folder with an elastic binding. So we move from the active voice, I placed the documents, to the passive voice, the documents were placed. And no need to write by me, as that's implied, no need for that. Unfortunately, although he completed the project within the deadline, our team deemed the work to be unsatisfactory. Now in this case we've got two different subjects, but because both can be understood, we don't have to say by him or by our team. We can just say, although the project was completed within the deadline, the work was deemed to be unsatisfactory. So you can see another use of the passive voice being used for a formal letter here. So those were just 4 tips and techniques that you can take into your exam, and now we're going to talk about how you could use those techniques and all of the techniques, strategies, tips, vocabulary, grammar that you've learnt in this course, and put all of that into practice with some guidance.